to the Weekly Bioanalysis, a KCAS podcast.
Hello, and welcome to the 47th episode of the Weekly Bioanalysis, the official podcast of KCAS Bioanalytical and Biomarker Services. KCAS is a bioanalytical CRO serving the pharmaceutical and biopharmaceutical industries for over 40 years. My name is Dominic Guarino, and I've been in the ligand binding assay, biomarker, cell gene therapy space for a little over 27 years. I'm here with my co-host, John Perkins.
Hi, I'm John Perkins. I have been in the bioanalytical LCMS space for around the 26, 27 years too.
John and I are senior scientific advisors at KCAS, and either or both of us are available to answer any questions you may have regarding this podcast or any of KCAS services. I'm located in Kansas, John is in upstate New York, and our producers are in Missouri and Kansas City, so we're kind of all over the map. We are thrilled to have you listening to the 47th episode of the podcast, which is now available virtually everywhere: Apple Podcast, iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, Amazon, and many others. Wherever you choose to find and play your podcast, you can now likely find the Weekly Bioanalysis. We welcome all of you, whether you're joining us for the first time or if you're a regular listener. If you are unfamiliar with the podcast, we will review the latest news and resources, and typically we focus on COVID news and non-COVID news, and maybe sprinkle in some other things like investments and so forth. And then we focus on a topic of our choosing before discussing any feedback we've had from you. We're constantly looking for topics, and we'd be happy to discuss something that you want us to cover. Today's podcast is a very special one. We'll be discussing Pfizer's vaccine approval and how we got here and what it means going forward. We are looking forward to a fun episode today. To kick us off for podcast number 47, we're going to jump into the news and resources. John?
First up, not quite really sure how to address this, but let's start with the headline. Ivermectin should not be used to treat COVID, FDA says. This is stemmed out of, it's stemmed out the Mississippi Department of Health, who issued a similar statement because vaccine suspicious people in Mississippi have been taking ivermectin because they've read about the possible beneficial effects of it. And it's led to a lot of calls to the Mississippi State Department of Health because people are suffering side effects from ivermectin. Ivermectin, if you don't know it, is actually approved for use for adults, but it's to treat head lice, scabies, things like that. The main use of it commercially is really in livestock as a dewormer. This actually builds on what we talked about last podcast, where people, it's like there's lots of information out there that is verifiable, that you can make intelligent decisions. There's also a lot of information out there that isn't verifiable but takes on a life of its own. This comes out of some small studies in South America where they talked about beneficial effects, but if you look at the designs, it's very small patient populations, really no power to those studies. And since then, there's been no study to show that ivermectin has any beneficial effect, but people are running with it. And I will pass it on to you, Dom.
Yeah, I think it's one of those, I don't know where people got the idea to take a livestock drug, right? And immediately, John, like you, the first thing that pops into my mind is like, well, that thing's got to be super concentrated. Why would you take that? It could be poisonous, right?
Yes,
that's what pops. And they say that in here.
Yeah.
But, I think it's just one of those moments where, somebody, it looks like it kind of made, like you said, there was some, I don't know if ancillary is the right word, but there was some evidence of it potentially working. And we've taught, COVID's a hormonal, like the ACE2 pathway, there's hormones involved in some of this, right? There's a lot of things that can potentially be somewhat maybe effective. But the reality is, I can't imagine taking a livestock pill, John. I'm shocked at this. I think but people order drugs off of the internet all the time. So people do crazy stuff that I think most of our audience and you and I are not, we just don't behave that way. We we would kind of go to our doctor and have a discussion before we took a pill, right? Not just
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah.
whatever. But like people, this whole, I even watch a Netflix show, How to Sell Drugs Online Fast, right? So this to me reeks of just I don't know if they think they're mavericks or defiant, and so they say, "I know better than you." That's like, "Oh, I know better than you" mentality, and it's dumbfounding, John. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't want to laugh, but I'm just it's cracking
Yeah.
me up a little bit.
I'm
And it's of course it's Mississippi and Louisiana, and it's just like,
sure.
oh my God,
Yeah.
right? Like, oh
I saw yesterday there was actually a prison hospital in Arkansas had been prescribing ivermectin to inmates. I'm starting to think that the scariest words in the English language was actually I've done my own research, because
yeah,
as soon as
yeah,
you hear that, you know that what's going to come out of people's
yeah,
mouths is really not
yeah.
going to be very much tailored to reality. So yeah, I it's I don't know how you address this stuff. I mean, you can warn it, but these are people who are already on this path. Anything the FDA says is going to be they're going to treat that with suspicion. Anything the Mississippi Department of Health, they're going to treat that with suspicion, because they've decided that vaccines and all these other things. I mean, you got an entire pharmaceutical industry is focused on trying to address a pandemic. Yeah, they think they know better because they've read about ivermectin on the internet. I think we probably should leave it at that and move on to the next topic.
I think we have. I think that's well said, John. Let's move on. But do not take livestock medicines for any reason, right? Just
Absolutely not. If you've got a medical condition, talk to your doctor and let them prescribe something. And if they prescribe it, then that's likely something to go with.
yeah.
Yeah.
And this is like the whole hydroxychloroquine,
Yep. Yep.
issue, but only at least that one, like the side, I think the side effects on that one were much. There were some, but milder, and then there was like back and forth, and in terms of its
Yep.
efficacy, and then
It-
proven not to be right. But this is
yeah.
bonkers, John. And you're right. Like every person that has access to the internet thinks they know better than the doctor. I mean, I imagine being a physician today has got to be very hard to hear someone say, "Oh, I read this on the internet." It's like, oh,
Yeah. Yeah.
but let's go on to the next news topic, John.
Sure, absolutely. And this really I think things like people taking ivermectin feeds into this next news topic. The headline is "Unvaccinated Deaths Overwhelm Health Workers in COVID Hot Zones." This was on Stat News, and honestly, we talk all things about COVID, but we don't acknowledge health workers enough in this. And this is actually a unit, the unit within the National Disaster Medical System. These are nurses who are effectively a National Guard for healthcare. If there's a health emergency, they will drop their daily job and fly to wherever that is. So they deal with hurricanes, any natural disasters they get called in for. But COVID-19 has really called them into this, and this group in particular, they were it started off with one nurse. Her name, I would like to acknowledge who each of them are. Where is she? I can't find her name now.
Yeah, I'll
Anyway,
look.
I will find. Oh yeah, Bren Ingalls, the nurse at the first talking. I mean, she's been deployed more than a dozen times to hospitals, clinics, and cruise ships throughout the course of this. But what they're finding now is, with the resurgence of COVID-19 in the south, because of the very, very low vaccination rates, they are now being deployed into the south to these hospital rooms. And for these people, it's not just being deployed to help people who have COVID. They are generally put on the wards with people who are very, very unlikely to pull out of this. So it's bad on the patient, it's bad on the family, and it's really, really draining on the medical staff. And these are people who are here to help, and they're being put through hell because you've got populations won't use a tool that we have to hand to actually put this pandemic to bed,
Yeah.
that's what I'm going to say, and then I'll pass it off to you, Dominic.
Yeah, no. So it's the National Disaster Medical System, right? The
Hmm.
NDMS, which is part of the National Guard, right? So I'm learning a little bit,
They said,
and
I think
you
they
see
said,
them at Katrina, right? You see these, when you
sure.
think of Katrina, you're like, oh, that makes sense. But you're right, they're being deployed, and then you make a really good point. They are. Remember, the vaccine is not. It's not a force field. It does not mean you're 100%
No,
not going to get COVID. These poor individuals are exhausted. Now with this resurgence, despite being vaccinated, they got to go into the belly, you could say the belly of the lion, so to speak, right? The
Sure.
mouth of the lion,
Yep.
and all because people have, people want to take people want to take livestock medication but won't get a vaccine, right? So this is crazy. It's actually from brings two very powerful emotions, right? Like one is my pride, right? Very proud of these people. It's amazing we have this in our country. The infrastructure's there. They're like Johnny on the spot, like you said. These are people who are in our National Guard who are now leaving their jobs to go into emergency rooms across the country. But just that's amazing. That's what makes our country so powerful. And then on the flip side, you get, like you said, like 37% of Mississippi's vaccinated. It's real low numbers, and that's what's causing all this. So and then you get kind of like, I don't know if angry is the right word, but just a little disappointed in people who don't want to roll up their arm. But this is a
Sure.
great story, John, and
Yeah.
it's amazing. And one thing, so I wonder. But go ahead, John. I was
I'm going to
kind of.
say, yeah, I would say to anyone, if you can search out the Stat News article on this, it is really worthwhile reading it firsthand. I'm just obviously doing an editorial clip through it. I mean, just to say just to summarize or part of it, in Louisiana, the unvaccinated account for roughly 9 in 10 current hospitalizations. So like you say, the vaccine doesn't magically protect you, but it really does make it more likely that if you do get COVID, you're not going to be hospitalised, and therefore you're going to survive it. The unvaccinated account for 98.4% of all COVID-19 deaths. I mean, you see these numbers, and it's like, why won't you do something about it? I have to say, I read every article that I see about people who are, oh, I was unvaccinated. And I got sick, and I'm advising people to get vaccinated. I read all the ones about the people who are unvaccinated and died, but told their family members on their deathbed to get unvaccinated, because these are all people's lives that they've read something and thought, because I read something on the internet that says this vaccine's unsafe and there's all the reasons why I shouldn't take this vaccine, they've died because of it.
Yeah.
Their
No.
families have been left bereft because of it. You've got children being orphaned because of it. I mean, the long term impact of this is huge, because people won't. I don't understand the lack of trust here compared to, and we've talked about this in the past, compared to things like the polio vaccine rollout decades ago, where towns turned out en masse to be
Yeah.
vaccinated
Yeah.
to take advantage of something, and as a result, polio is largely eliminated, apart from the odds, of a vaccine rebound, instance in Africa. It really is pretty much gone from the planet.
John, it
We
has
have,
to be social media. You touched
yeah,
on it back then. The bell sort of rang, and you came out and got your vaccine because that was, people were dying. You knew they were dying. They were working on it, and then you came out. Social media has just corrupted our information, and it's crazy. And this story is, it's unbelievable, the number, like the death rate, and you said something very powerful. The impact here, 9 out of 10 hospitalizations, but 98.5% of all deaths, and this
yep,
is in Louisiana, are due to people who are unvaccinated. I think it's across the country, it's at that number. And John, I had, if you start to talk to more people, and I have, because I've had a revolving door here, so many people are telling me about how unvaccinated family members and friends are going to weddings, and then an outbreak will happen, and then two, three family members are dying. All those people are defiant. They say, "Oh, I don't need the vaccine," and this and that. So it's really, I don't know. Like, I guess I could take a moment now to talk about it, but I've had more people contacting me about should I get the vaccine, and more people who were resistant flipping over to it. I think I touched on a friend of mine who got it. She went ahead. She was very defiant of it, got sick, saw the numbers, heard the numbers, and so she's been vaccinated now. My own brother is only now going to get a vaccine, John. The rest of us are vaccinated. It's the one who thinks, God bless you, Rich, I love you, but he also thought Al Qaeda was coming up the mountain at him back in 2000 in Colorado. But that also makes America great. But he is now, even this morning, he was like questioning me because it's approved, so he's going to get it. There's an individual who was
sure,
waiting
yeah,
for approval. So
yeah.
I digress. But it's John. As I said to him, just roll your sleeve up and take it. And he's like, "Well, why isn't this on the label?" And I'm like, "Oh man, like it's there's so much, I guess, um, dis disbelief in our government. And we're not going to solve it or anything, so maybe we'll
No,
move on.
we're,
But
we're, we're not.
it is unbelievable.
I think all you best you can do is just entreat people to please get vaccinated. Your hospital systems are overwhelmed because of people, the hospital systems are overwhelmed because people won't get vaccinated, which is why the NDMS group have to get parachuted in to actually bail out these systems. I mean, that's why they're in Louisiana. It's the hospitals are overwhelmed and there's staff shortages because either the existing staff are exhausted or they've become infected with COVID. So, I mean,
Yeah, there's
yeah,
some powerful
this
stuff
is
here,
all
John.
about pitching together and let's
Yeah,
address this pandemic. And I saw, I think it was 2 days ago that Anthony Fauci was saying we might be back to normal by spring next year. We were talking a year ago being back to normal by now. So
yeah,
we've
yeah,
already lost like
yeah.
over another 6 months. And I
Right.
want my life to be back to normal. We've just cancelled my son's wedding in Jamaica because of this because Jamaica's gone into lockdown, and obviously the US isn't the healthiest place to be either. So,
No,
that's the effect that this has. It's and
yeah.
I mean, I want life to be where it was, and it's never going to be quite where it was, but I'd like it to be close, and we're not
Yeah.
even close
It
at
was
the
supposed to be
moment.
July. It was supposed to be July 4th this summer, right?
Yeah,
That's when we were supposed to return. And John, you mentioned Bren Ingle is one of the nurses here, and I think we should give a nice shout out to
sure.
um, Stephanie Flood Thomas. And John, I don't want to steal too much thunder from you, but Stephanie Flood Thomas talks about how they need full-time mental counselors because of this. 30% of all healthcare professionals are thinking about leaving the profession because they're exhausted. You want to talk about already that system was lacking a little bit. There
Yes,
was a lack of nurses, and now you want to 30% are like, forget it, I'm leaving. It's a little bit worrisome. But I don't know. I don't, I'm not gonna. The sky is not falling, but we certainly want to be. Um, you know, I don't. I want to stop short of saying, hey, we should mandate, make it mandatory to take it. But when you think about it in the grand scheme of things, you can't work in any hospital or any sort of blood based without getting a hepatitis shot. You can't go to school without measles, mumps, rubella, diphtheria, tetanus. So this wouldn't be any different. I think there's this sense of, oh, this is an administrative. It's forget all that. I think we're losing sight that we've always had to take vaccines. This isn't new.
yes,
So it's
yes.
just it's so warped thinking to be so provincial about the moment rather than, hey, why don't you look at what you've done throughout your life and behave like a rational person. So there's
Sure.
my
Yep.
diatribe.
I think I'm glad you raised the mental health things. I think that's key because there'll be knock-on effects in this for years to come. So let's
Yeah.
let's let's move on to the next um, next news topic, which offers its own ethical dilemma. The headline of this is Biden administration's push for COVID boosters raises concerns about the science and morality of the plan. So obviously, background to this is we're currently dealing with the Delta variant and the way it's surging in the American population, and it is affecting vaccinated people more than obviously prior variants. So there's some concern about what that means for everyone. So both Pfizer and Moderna have presented data which I haven't seen. I'm not going to comment on about the effect, additional protection available for booster shots, and the current administration is saying that they want to offer boosters to the public, pending the FDA's endorsement. That's great for us. But in the bigger picture, and this is where it isn't just about the COVID in the US; it's a worldwide thing. This is where I start to struggle. I would have to say if someone came up to me with a needle full of vaccine and said, "Here's a booster shot for you. Will you take it?" I'd say, "Well, yeah, sure, stick it in my arm." But the bigger picture is, if I'm having that booster shot, that's a dose that isn't going to a country somewhere else in the world where we've got vaccination rates of less than 10% across the population, and those countries need help. So that's the ethical dilemma here, and I'm sort of struggling with that one because to me, to address this, we really need to get the entire world inoculated on this, and there's that's it's is it yes, we want to protect our population here, but is it the ethical thing to do when other countries really don't have that protection even to the level we do?
Yeah, and Michael Ryan at the WHO says it best. We're planning to hand out extra life jackets to people who already have life jackets while we're leaving other people to drown.
Yep.
That's what I mean. There's no at this stage. One would have to think. I've only most of us have not been vaccinated for more than say 6 months. Why would a booster seems, um, I don't know, quite unnecessary. Although like you said, John, you said it well. I'd roll my sleeve up and take it if offered.
Sure.
But if I were looking at a bunch of people that had never been vaccinated, I'd be like, I don't want this. Give it to them. But that's unfortunately, I'm not sure why we are choosing to do this, and I still think we talked a little bit this as we prep, John. I mean, isn't there? Aren't we going to make a new one next year, right? Like when I say, aren't we going to make it? So one would think that Pfizer and Moderna and those types of companies are already making the next generation of
Sure.
this,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
so I don't know. This is when like my knowledge of approval of vaccines. Like, do they have to get that approved again, John? Like, oh wow, maybe that's a whole nother topic. Like, what does that look like from flu season to flu season versus what does it do for um, COVID vaccines? It might
Yeah.
even be a good topic, right? Because they're going to
Sure.
probably
Yeah.
engineer it
Yeah.
slightly different to deal with the variants and so
Yep.
forth. But to your point, there's like Israel, Germany, England, and France are all kind of maybe rolling out booster shots, and then you hear about like leaders of Taiwan who haven't even
Sure.
they just
Yeah.
got their first vaccine. So like
I,
it
I,
does make it
I,
I hope our audience appreciates that we've gone from people taking livestock in the US because they're slightly maybe not all put together to our nurses are overwhelmed because people are mind you, there are so many unvaccinated people, yet you and I would go get a third. It's
sure.
just
Yeah.
all, it makes my head hurt to
It
think
is
about
all over
how
the place, and the Taiwan. I'm glad I stumbled across the Taiwan thing because Taiwan actually has been a model of how to deal with this. At least in the early days, I don't know where they stand with Delta, but Taiwan was a model in terms of how to deal with cases with the early variants. But the article was basically the president of Taiwan who Tsai Ing-wen received her first shot of the island's homegrown COVID-19 vaccine. Taiwan is having a real struggle getting their hands on approved or authorized vaccines. So they're actually Medigen, or a company in Taipei, have actually developed a vaccine, but it hasn't been through phase 3, and there's no efficacy data available. But because they can't get the vaccines that we all talk about on a weekly basis on this podcast, they have to. I mean, they're working on the assumption that is good to go, and that's the inequity that the world is dealing with. We're talking third shot. Taiwan can't even get a first shot. Not even for the president. It's yeah. The global equity thing is disturbing.
yeah, we're well, John, I guess we're going to move on from this topic, but it is one that we would to truly get back to normal. The rest of the world has to
Yep.
get vaccinated as well. I don't think I hope we all fully appreciate that, right? We can't just, unless we want to like shut our border forever, and that's not going to happen, right? We've got way too much. There's just too many people traveling about in the US. It's just part of our presence in the world that's not going to happen. So you think we'd make a more, concerted effort along with other, let's say, developed countries to
Sure.
really roll out the vaccine to those who want it. And I wonder what the numbers are in nation. I wonder what it would be in a nation that doesn't have the vaccine. Would only half the population take it? I don't know. That's a
Yeah. I mean, I'm not having a go here, but in the same, we got CDC Director Rochelle Walensky saying that, well, the US plans to dispense 100 million booster shots by the end of the year, but it's sending 200 million vaccine shots elsewhere. That sounds great, but 200 million shots for what's the world population in terms of billions? It doesn't
yeah,
even touch the
it's a drop in the
doesn't touch the
bucket.
water.
Yeah.
And okay, the US is doing so. I'm not sure what other countries are doing. I know
And
the
we
UK,
and I
UK is doing nothing.
yeah,
Um,
I
it
promise you there's plenty of vaccines available, John. I promise you there are plenty. There is no shortage of the vaccine. So even that number seems very low.
mhm.
With the way we've been manufacturing it, you know how great we can be at making things.
Sure, absolutely, yeah,
Remember a year ago we talked about all these plants building up their engines and everything. they're stockpiling them. It's just, and no one. It's not like we're 100% or even 90% vaccinated here. Although, as a country, we're creeping up into like the 70%. But that still just means there's ample amount of vaccine
Yes.
available. And
Yes.
let's move on. It's
Yep.
actually
Yep.
kind of it's kind of making me sad that we're not,
Yep. Yep.
kind of being more altruistic. But John, why don't you tell us a little bit about my alumni?
Sure. Well, actually, it turns out there's two stories in parallel, but both really coming at the same at the same year. We talked about these back in May, actually, when Pitt first talked about this work. So Pitt, University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine's inhalable anti-COVID nanobodies inspired by llamas, remarkably active against the Delta variant. So basically, this is again, like I say, University of Pittsburgh School of Medicine, looking at they're developing nanobodies, so they're fragments of nanobodies that actually naturally occur in llamas and other members of the camelid family. So they're basically taking a cue from nature, but they made a number of different nanobodies and found that the most active ones are actually they tested in hamsters, and the most potent antibody could clear the virus from the hamster's lungs in 10 days. They actually, because they've looked at a series of these, they've got 3 different mechanisms of action. So it looks like there's a lot of potential for the longer term to get into clinical and then beyond. And actually, in parallel, there's a Belgian biotech, Exavir, is actually just launched its phase 1 study in healthy volunteers for a Llama antibody program known as XVR011. So this is moving forward. It will be very interesting. But the attraction of the nanobodies is ease of administration compared to conventional antibodies, as well as their sort of obviously their medical effect. So there could be if there could be this could have legs. So it's a nice topic to come back to.
Yeah, they talk about these. So first, I think it's great that we can take advantage of nature. I'll give a little, llamas. I don't know anything about the llama immune system, but apparently they make nanobodies or smaller antibodies than humans. And I'll take a second. We're a drug development podcast. This is actually something we do quite a bit of in our anti-drug antibody positive control manufacturing. We actually use hens or chickens, and they make IGYs, and they're smaller in size, so they can solve some problems from other species because of, in a bioanalytical setting, John, we're frequently putting other antibodies in there, so these smaller ones won't cross-react as much. They're due to the size of them, they can actually coat the plate better. They can get into smaller crevices better, so it gives you a little bit more sensitivity and specificity. But more importantly, they lack the homology of human FC. That's really what it's about. The FC is the anchoring portion of the antibody. So
Sure.
it's not surprising, sorry to take a little side into science there.
No. It's all relevant.
Yeah. So it's amazing. I wonder why llamas. It seems like it might have been. I'd like to interview how they got to the llama, but it's great that they found these, and so then they have this sort of cocktail. I don't know if it's a cocktail, but there's 3 pathways that those nanobodies can sort of prevent things, and they're neutralizing. They go into spike protein areas, and then there is actually a part of the spike region that they can get to. So this is, like you said, you used a good word. This has legs. Like this is, and let's not forget, Pitt is the home of, the polio vaccine. I went to study vaccines there for a reason, right? So they know their vaccines. This is really got some great legs. And then hats off to the Belgian company for kind of taking it to the next level. And, God bless Tina and the llamas. And I'll give a shout out to Pedro. And I hope you know what I'm talking about, John.
I don't actually, but you can bring in. Like Tina?
Yeah,
quote from Tina in here.
That's from Napoleon Dynamite, is what.
Okay. Yeah, never seen it.
You didn't see Napoleon Dynamite? Sorry. Then that's those in the audience that have seen Napoleon Dynamite are gonna laugh at me because there's a llama called Tina, and he's like, "Eat your stupid food." And it's anyhow. Sorry.
See, my only knowledge of llamas is reading the Tintin books from Hergé, where I think there's a couple based in South America, and there's a running joke with llamas where if you get too much in their face, they spit back at you. So Captain Haddock gets spat in the face by various haddocks.
That's not a joke. I mean, my father-in-law. that's
Yeah.
real. We were at a
Oh,
zoo in
sure. Yeah.
Nebraska. Yeah, they'll spit at you. So I digress. But this is a great, this is an uplifting story, John. This is what I hope for those that listen to our podcast, this is what you want to hear about. This
Yeah,
is
sure.
the real positive. There's great stuff going on
Yeah,
that continue to
that
help us through
yeah.
COVID.
Yeah, we want to try and neutralize the stuff that really doesn't make sense, but really promote where we think things are going to go, and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
what will help us.
Don't take livestock medications, but you can take antibodies from llamas. That's what
You can
no.
you can benefit from what nature teaches us. I like there's a recurrent theme for this podcast that nature can teach us a lot. So
Yeah, yeah.
don't ever ignore it. Let's move on to
Sure.
non-COVID before we get to the main topic. And this. I meant to do a little bit more background research on this, but the headline is Feng Zhang unveils a new technology to potentially deliver mRNA, gene therapy, CRISPR, and more. And so we all talk about all the different vaccines and being mRNA based and DNA based and all the other things. But key to all these medications is actually the delivery. Because it's about the encapsulation of the mRNA in a lipid. It's a lipid mixture. It's mainly four lipids that come together. And I was actually I will probably touch on this later, but a lot of the a major barrier to delivering mRNA things was actually how effectively to get the mRNA encapsulated into lipids. Once that was solved, then it gave the fueled legs, and it's actually meant for for safe delivery. It's and lessen the risk of triggering immune responses, etc. That was a problem with early medications and in this
Yeah.
realm. So Feng Zhang and his team and where are they?
Yeah, they're at oh, he moves around a lot, John. Sorry, I do not know where. It doesn't say here, I don't think.
It doesn't, and I should have checked that because that was
I feel
actually
like
one
he's in
thing I wanted.
California again. But John, while you're looking for that, I'll jump in a little bit. So
So
we have
yeah,
same,
he's
go
actually at
ahead.
MIT. He currently
Oh,
holds the James and Patricia Poultice Professorship in Neuroscience at the McGovern Institute for Brain Research and in departments of Brain and Cognitive Sciences and Biological Engineering at the MIT. So
great.
yes,
Not surprising, right? This is for those. Feng Zhang is really considered I'll call him the godfather of CRISPR, right? But some of what John, it gets worse for us because they say at the center of the send system, which by the way, send to us means something very different. That's like
sure,
the
yeah,
way we
yeah,
send reports, right? So
yep,
now we've got another send, but this is their platform, the new system. It's selective endogenous encapsulation for cellular delivery, which is great. And what are they using? PEG 10, right? We're very familiar with pegylated things, and really all this does is help protect the mRNA encapsulated and is quite safe for you. So really, very cool stuff. I mean, it's still CRISPRs are they're still a ways away. They're working in animal models, but this is how advancements in science take place. This is
sure,
it.
yeah,
This is still probably a few years away from really making its way into humans, but what they're still doing is cellular targets. What proteins can they use? It's great. I mean, I don't have a strong desire to be in academia, John, but I got to tell you this: if I was, I'd be like, where this is where I'd want to be. Like, when I did go to grad school, all the dendritic cells were just emerging, and that's why I went to Pitt and studied dendritic cells. This is the new dendritic cell, which, by the way, dendritic cells went on to help make CAR T cells. In case you were wondering, they're all kind of linked, right? So, but for any young scientists out there, man, I'd get on this CRISPR bandwagon as fast as I possibly could if I was
sure.
in my early 20s or under 30. But anyhow, great story here, John, and
So yeah, yeah.
continued
It's
success.
basically the next step, like you say, is animal studies to see how this works. But yeah, it's rather than using the lipid envelope, it's using a proteinaceous envelope to
I'm
deliver.
sure Feng, has he won the Nobel Prize? Maybe we'll look that up, but I think he will, or I feel like he's already won, but for sure, a Nobel Prize scientist nonetheless.
Let me just check and see.
Yeah. And as you're doing that, John, I mean, I think we can segue into what our main topic is today, John, because this is I don't know about you, it's really starting to, I don't know about dominate my life, but everybody around me is asking me questions about it. And, um, and actually I feel like a lot of times I'll be out and people misinform people. I'll hear stuff and I'll have to, my wife will kick me under the table and like shake her head, just don't argue with people. But,
Sure.
so
Yeah.
Pfizer vaccine got approved, right? We should give a shout out to
Yep.
BioNTech as well. And we're going to go over how we got here and what it means going forward, right? So, um,
Yeah, yeah, I
John, I
mean,
mean, I
yeah,
think when we reflect back
let's
on, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just going to say let's take a step back and just acknowledge how huge this is. I mean, we'll routinely talk about Pfizer BioNTech vaccine, Moderna vaccines, but this is approval of a vaccine that when the virus emerged in late 2019, it was sequenced early 2020. It was authorized for use, late 2020, and here a year later we have our first official approval. And I know that people are suspicious about how quickly this has happened, but there's a lot of factors play into that. But this is a big deal. It's the fastest. It's one of the fastest approvals in the FDA's 115-year history. It's not the fastest, but it is definitely the fastest for a vaccine. Where the previous quickest one was the mumps vaccine in the 1960s that took 4 years, which is still fast compared to other vaccines. And there's, like I say, there's a number of factors that play into that. So the vaccine will now mark it as com, com, Comirnaty. I think that's how you pronounce it. And yeah, So this is a big deal. So hopefully it will help uptake of the vaccine. But we'll talk about this as we go through this topic.
Yeah, I think we're sitting here on, like you said, we're about 18 months ago. We're like, oh, this is going to take. I remember saying this will take at least 5 years, and
Sure. Yeah.
this is, 3 years would be a rush, and then we kind of, as the months went on, it was like, well, they probably got a jump start on it. Maybe it's going to take less. And then we saw how the entire field kind of rallied, and competitors started allowing people to use facilities, and then we were optimistic, and sure enough, it got pulled forward, and here we are, John. It is a historic day. It is
Sure.
it's a fabulous day for science. I want to get my pom poms out and start cheerleading as best I can, because this is what it's about. And even I mentioned my brother. Even he was like, it's very impressive, because now he's digging into it. He's like, I never realized what it all took to get into a drug approval. And I think people are really starting to appreciate science more, which is a really good thing too. So John, it's a very historic moment. I do agree with you that it's good to go back and see where we're at, and I hope
Sure.
everybody understands it's the largest clinical trial. It's the fastest one to market. It's just makes me all giddy and warm and happy to be part of the community, John.
Yeah. So first of all, I'm going to first of all say how did this happen so quickly? What really fed into this? Because I know that's been a criticism that I read. I read people saying that and I ignore it and walk away because it annoys me. But there are a lot of factors as to why it has happened quickly. First of all, the work that's been done in this area. The COVID-19 vaccine has benefited from previous efforts to address HIV, MERS, SARS, or Ebola. So certainly, there's the mRNA piece. This is the first approved mRNA based medication, but mRNA research has been going on for I think 20 years or
Yeah.
so.
Yeah.
I do want to. This is maybe a topic for another
It's just the
podcast.
evolution of mRNAs. Yeah, go ahead.
Absolutely, the actual the lipid technology. So the four lipids that encapsulate the mRNA. That was actually they figured that out in the early 2000s. It was a group of Canadian researchers, and I found an article on that last week, and I'm trying to figure out when we could. It's incredibly infighting based on all of that.
Do you know
It's
lipid
fascinating.
technologies, John? They go back to like the early '90s and
Hmm.
late mid '80s. My
Yeah.
good buddy, a good mentor of mine, Bruce Babbitt, who I worked for in Boston for years, he got his doctorate in lipid particle
Sure. Yeah.
technologies back in the 1980s. So go on. Sorry to it's but
I think
it's all coming together. Yes,
yeah, so
fantastic.
the Canadian researchers are the ones who really got they figured out the four lipids and then how to combine it and get the mRNA safely encapsulated. That was the big step forward. And like I say, I'll forward you the article and we can figure out when we're going to talk about it because it's fascinating in itself. Of course, the mRNA we got Katalin Kariko was working on that
Mm,
in the early days. She's now a senior executive of BioNTech. Um, the one thing that actually I in looking through this yesterday was one of the keys to this was actually the fact that COVID is so infectious. Looking at other vaccines, you go through a spike and then you go through a lull, and then you're looking for a population that you can actually include in a clinical trial to continue to test safety efficacy. With COVID, we had this constant conveyor belt of people getting infected. So the patient population never went away. So we could actually
yeah.
populate phase three trials very quickly. So those phase three trials could go ahead. That is actually a big
Wow.
factor in the speed here.
I want to
And
repeat what you just said there, right? So if everybody understands that, like if you were doing a flu vaccine, for example, because I think those are some of the largest trials, they were seasonal, is what you're saying.
yeah,
This
sure,
there was no
absolutely,
season; it was
yeah,
just but ample people to test, I guess, because of the constant. I mean, even when we had some lag phases of COVID outbreaks, there were still plenty of people to vaccinate. So sorry, John, go on.
yeah. No, so it is like flu, but the instance that was quoted was actually the Zika virus. Remember Zika virus? There was in Brazil. There was all this like focus on the
I
Zika
do.
virus, and then it naturally went away, and then there was no population to really include in large scale trials. Whereas with COVID, you've had that population, so you can not only was the ability to get a Pfizer phase 3 trial, but Moderna, AstraZeneca, J&J, Novavax, all there's been that population available to keep all these trials going, so that we can figure out safety and efficacy. Then the other factor where we talk about the in parallel was that the pharmaceutical companies took the gamble that their vaccines were going to be safe and efficacious, and so they ramped up manufacturing quickly to have doses available as soon as there was the authorization to then start getting shots in arms. It's like, think how quickly we went from authorized to actually, it's over 60s or can get vaccinated, then over 50s, then medically vulnerable, and over 40s. It rolled out really quickly, and it was because that parallel piece. It
Yeah.
wasn't just, and it was so we'd had the phase three monitoring showing that it was efficacious. It was obviously there were people maintained as part of that phase three to look at long term safety, but because we'd ramped up manufacturing much earlier than we would normally, there was the doses to administer to people as soon as the signs were there that the vaccines were doing what they were designed to do.
Yeah, that was we covered that, John. All these manufacturing groups started, making and we had talked about how well that's a little unusual, right? Like normally there's more of an iterative approach, and like you said, they took that parallel approach, and that really kind of put us into I want to say warp speed, but it definitely advanced things like that. We would have instead of being very linear in the approach, which would have taken several more years, like you said, it was let's hedge our bets. It turns out that worked out well, and therefore we had millions and millions of doses ready to go. And
Sure.
like you said, it rolled out very well. I mean, um, and well, John, I almost want to take a small side turn because that's what I do,
Sure.
right?
Take
Think,
whatever you
think
want.
about how safe it is. People keep asking me like, is it safe? It's like, oh, how is it not safe at this point? Right? Like that's the piece that I think a lot of people, especially even as a scientist, there were moments where when they were doing this, when I say doing this, when companies like BioNTech and Pfizer started saying, hey, we're not approved yet, but we're gonna hold capacity. We're going to start looking at scaling up long before the final product's ready. That all worked very, very well. And I think it also tells these are hardy, John. They're not going anywhere. I think
Sure.
you've heard me talk about this is when people say, well, oh, are these safe? It's like, I've used the analogy of like Was it safe to use a CD player when the tape went away? Was it safe to use an MP3 player when the CD? Is it safe to use? Like, that's what this is. It's just one. Is it safe to use the cloud? That's how dangerous I think these vaccines
Sure.
are. But maybe I'm just a pro-vaccine person. But it's like it is incredibly safe. And at this stage, people talk about, is it having effects on, I don't know where the rumor started on. Is it going to cause any sort of fertility issues like that? I don't know of any vaccines that have caused fertility issues, but maybe I'm just naive about it. So anyhow, John,
Yeah.
it's something that this whole thing um, is going to be great. I feel like it's a great book. It's a great part of history, and we're so fortunate to be,
Sure.
despite a pandemic that was unfortunate. But boy, is it fortunate to be in the middle of this, to be witnessing it with our eyes, the historic moment scientifically.
Sure, and a couple of other points. And actually, I do want to touch on the safety. I mean, obviously, the phase 3 trials were tens of thousands of participants, and there's a safety arm, etc. But now the vaccine has been administered to hundreds of millions of people, and we haven't seen any major adverse events related to the vaccine, which there's your safety assessment in the real world. It's doing what it's supposed to do, and it's safe. Another piece on the speed. Nothing helps you do things quickly like competition, and when you've got multiple companies working on vaccines, and if you know it can hit your bottom line, obviously you're going to work as quickly as possible to be that first to approval, first to market, and everything else. So that was obviously spurring people as well. I mean, it wasn't just one company, working by themselves to address, a disease state they'd identified. This is, the international emergency that multiple companies were going for, and obviously the realization that multiple shots were needed to address what we're dealing with. So that all plays into the speed factor as well.
The speed definitely of this is historic. It's something where it, it's hard to actually put into words just how fast this went, how um, I guess smooth is the word that comes to
Sure.
mind. I mean,
Yeah.
outside of maybe some people being skeptical and still, somewhat defiant, there's still mixed messages. But this is, as I've said before, and as we even talked about earlier, this is technology from like the 90s. This isn't, cancer patients have been receiving these types of vaccines, or, in that case, it's a therapy for decades. And so, those individuals have never exhibited any sort of safety issues. And then just the whole process here is, it's giddy, John. I mean,
Yeah.
we're
Yeah.
it's unbelievable. And so just continuing along with the podcast, I
Yeah.
think
I
I
think
think we
that.
should let's touch a little bit. I don't know how much we want to talk about the approval itself. Is pretty cool, right? It's a
Sure.
BLA
Yeah.
submission.
Yeah, can I just
Sure.
very quickly on the old technology? That is, I mean, that's all part of science. It's like someone makes a discovery that it might not have too many legs, but what they've done sets other people thinking. They then make improvements, and things progress. Like you say, this is 20 years in the making, and actually it was almost that the timing was perfect for this particular virus. Things had matured to the stage that we had the tools in place ready to go, and a lot of the wrinkles, as we always refer to them, had been ironed out. So the path forward was obvious to researchers in this area. That actually has been very helpful.
Yeah. No, and you're right. So like a roadmap is what you're saying. There was a
Sure.
roadmap to do this, and I think even the older, we say older technologies. It's not like the J&J vaccine is still something I would take in a
Oh,
heartbeat, right?
absolutely. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
still highly effective. It's still, that's still an advancement in a protein based. That's come. It's not your dad's vaccine or however it's not the polio vaccine. There's a major advancement there to make that particular, um, you know. Uh, protein based vaccine. So it's really great stuff.
Y-
So So, John, where do we want to go here? I see we got a little bit.
I'll just move quickly on to the phase 3 trial summary. There's not a lot to say otherwise, but here's what the data were based on. So the FDA reviewed efficacy results across more than 40,000 phase 3 trial participants, and then there's been safety data based on monitoring 12,000 patients for more than 6 months. So, but again, people say it's rushed, but how do we know it's long-term safety? It's like we can only know as long as it's been in existence and available. You can't have any more than that. So this was obviously accelerated, but I would love to know how much manpower at the FDA was applied to this, because
Mm.
again, it's that whole thing. You don't have one person sitting in a room going through this. If this is a package that's of critical importance to the planet, you throw resources at this, and again, it's that thing that more people working in parallel, looking at data, etc. There'll obviously be a collation, but that's how you move things quickly. So there's been no. The FDA have said there's been no shortcuts taken. I'm sure there's been no shortcuts taken on this, because obviously, if there was, it would rebound on them.
Yeah, they didn't
Everything has
have to.
been done right. Everything's been done right. It's just been done quickly. And
Yeah, they didn't have to take shortcuts, John, because part of what you said, there was no seasonal gap in patients, and it's there, and it went so. Part of the reason why it went so fast is they didn't have to worry about enrollment. That was never an issue.
Sure,
Like
absolutely, yeah,
people
yeah.
were, most people would be more than willing to participate. Physicians wanted to participate. If you're sitting here watching people languish or die and a vaccine comes along, you're absolutely going to promote that, I would believe. So, but it is, just I hope everybody understands how historic it is to, it's the fastest vaccine approved. It's the largest study. It's just great. Arguably one of the most effective vaccines, John. I mean, think about 99% of the deaths are unvaccinated people. I mean, that's let's not lose sight of how effective it
Sure, yeah,
is. Yeah,
yeah,
that's
yeah.
maybe the biggest part we haven't really even talked about. The efficacy of it is unbelievable. It's amazing, right?
Yeah, yes, and but there obviously, because obviously it's an ongoing being reviewed. There is, there's been reports from Israel, etc., about efficacy dropping, which is why the booster debate will still be ongoing after this week. But that's all part of the development
Yeah,
process. I mean, it might be long term. It does become a
but that,
three-step
see,
shot.
some of that though, right? Israel was always ahead of the curve. Maybe that's just like you need a booster, right? And
Mhm.
not like a
Oh,
third
sure.
shot. I'm
Yeah.
talking about, like, oh, you don't consider the annual flu shot a boost.
No, understood.
That's
Sure.
yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah,
So,
I'm
John,
just
there's
saying.
some.
I'm
Go
just
ahead.
saying, as part of the typical process, as you learn more, that might be, because, so I mean, obviously, like with like the hepatitis vaccines, a three-step part,
Hmm.
where it's
Hmm.
one, and like the third one is like 18 months after the
Yeah,
second one,
usually I
stuff like
didn't
that.
get. I don't. A lot of people don't need the third.
Yeah, yeah,
How come
sure.
I got the
And
third one?
I
I don't
know
know.
last time I had the hepatitis one, I should have had the third shot
Can't.
right when everything was locked down, so I haven't had it. So yeah, I mean, there are
I get.
obviously instances of other vaccines where it is multiple
Well,
step
but
process.
to your point, that like tetanus now, they're giving that booster every 10 years, right? So
Sure.
who
Yeah.
that it's not, it's still to be determined. I
Yep.
think
Absolutely.
how this is all going to go down. But John, talk a little bit about this. Is some good stuff you have about upcoming milestones for the vaccine. So it's not done, right? There's still a lot of post
Yeah.
marketing that needs to be done.
Exactly. And this, yeah, obviously the vaccine's approved, but there have, I mean, there is some prescribing guidelines for the vaccine. So it's contraindicated for patients with a history of pre-existing severe allergic reactions to any component of the vaccine. I mean, we remember in the early days when the
Yeah.
rollout started, there was a couple of people went into anaphylactic shock, and of course, because there was all the attention on the vaccine, it became, oh my god, it's like there's something we all have to be aware of. There's some people will have to be aware that if you're a severely allergic individual, you have to be careful with that. There is also an increased risk of myocarditis and pericarditis, particularly within 7 days of administering the second dose, as well as a risk of fainting during administration. That's why we all sit for 15 minutes after both shots. But as a result of that, there is actually more studies ongoing on the vaccine. So basically, the FDA has said, based on the information we have, this is approved, but we want these additional studies because there are these couple of flags, particularly the myocarditis and pericarditis, just to really nail down how prevalent is that, how common an instance is it we have to look out for. So there's a study which is to look at myocarditis and pericarditis that will finish in 2025. There's another finishing in 2024. There's another in 2024 and another in 2027. So there's your long-term study looking at this. So
Yeah.
I mean that's it's a common thing to do. It's like we approve this, but we just want you to do these additional studies to really answer these lingering questions,
Well,
which is entirely appropriate in this situation.
the funny part is all these people saying, "Oh, I worry about side effects," and sure, there might be. I'm not going to say myocarditis or pericarditis is not dangerous or life threatening, but let's face facts: unvaccinated people are dying.
Yes, absolutely.
You know what I mean? Like
That's
it's
the bottom line.
if I have to deal with some myocarditis or pericarditis versus dying, I know which one I'm taking. So it's not, it's irrational to think that it's irrational to say, "Oh, I'm going to use natural immunity," because people who are getting COVID that are unvaccinated are either dying or their loss of central nervous function, smell, taste, and everything. Some of them aren't recovering.
Yeah,
Some that
we,
are,
we
and if you're vaccinated and you get sick, you recover. So there's just so much more benefit to being vaccinated, John.
sure we
Let's
haven't
move
talked.
on. We got
You're right. We haven't
we got a
talked
lot
long.
to cover still yet,
Yeah,
John.
sure.
That's the thing.
Just
But I
very
like this
quickly.
next one. Go ahead. Let's
Yeah,
talk
you're
about.
right though, but we haven't talked long COVID, which at some point we probably should talk about, because you're right. It's not just death; it's some of
Oh,
the long term
wait
effects
till you
of this
see what that's
virus.
coming out. People like if anybody's unvaccinated and listening, you're just putting yourself in a lot of long. If you think that natural immunity is better than getting vaccinated, that is a really bad thought process there. And I'm sure there will
Sure.
be more publications showing, oh, look, if you were vaccinated and still got COVID, you'll get X symptoms and Y long-term effects. Very little, I bet. But
Yeah,
if you're constantly getting people who have gotten COVID a couple times and they're not vaccinated, that's who's dying, John.
sure.
That's it.
And honestly, if ask the same question without COVID in the sentence, do you trust your natural immunity to if you were exposed to polio, smallpox,
No,
measles,
especially as I'm rounding
shingles?
50.
Yeah,
The answer is
exactly.
no.
Exactly. And no matter how fit you are, you've got no prediction of as to how your body's going to deal with it.
Uh,
Anyway, yes.
yeah,
So,
yeah, yeah.
or Ebola or Zika or
Any of
any of
it,
these.
right? Like
Yeah.
any.
So,
So,
yeah.
so John, we're both fired up here, right? Like, the let's talk about mandated vaccines. We touched on it, but like, I don't see this as anything but a good thing. And
I
I wish we had a better word than mandated. It just seems
sure.
so
Yeah.
authoritative.
Yeah.
It seems
Yeah.
people will start to say, America first. And it's like, yeah, that's what we're saying. Take the vaccine, America
Yeah.
first. You're
Take the
right. Take the
vaccine.
vaccine.
Take
Yeah.
the vaccine because it's better for you and it's better for your co-workers and it's better for your family and it's pretty much it's better for everyone.
As I said
Yeah.
before, the argument is we can't work at KCS without a hepatitis shot. So I don't know why you think you could work without getting COVID. I don't. No one ever put up this was never an issue.
Sure.
So I don't know
Yeah.
why it is now, but it is. It is. It's
Yeah.
very strange.
So that is so there's a couple of things of the reason for the sorry, let me step back a bit. Um, Obviously, the Pfizer vaccine has been authorized for a year, um, but the step from authorization to approval is hugely significant. Like you said about your brother, it will hopefully persuade some of those people who are holding off because it hadn't been fully approved. Again, I'm still not
I,
sure why that
I
makes
I
a
think
huge
I think
difference,
I think
but
you're going to
it
see
does for some
hospitals,
people.
right? Sorry to talk over you, John, a little bit there. I
Sure.
think hospitals will say, "Hey, oh, you're not vaccinated. We're not going to give you heart surgery until you get vaccinated."
Yeah,
Like, is it right?
I think you will see increasing
Why?
instances of that. To be honest,
Why that's
um,
saving that we just talked about our healthcare workers in jeopardy. That's
sure.
the solution. Oh, you want to come into the hospital? Lift your arm up. Boop. That's
Yeah,
just it. That's it.
yeah. But so a it will hopefully hopefully convert some of the vaccine suspicious to actually take it. And I think there was a Kaiser survey that said 31% of the people they surveyed said that approval would make a difference. I think that number might be inflated, but we'll obviously
No, I
wait
think
and
it,
see.
John. I don't think it's inflated. I think there were physicians who were waiting until approval before they
Okay.
started distributing it. I do
Yeah.
think there's probably more doctors that are anti-vaxxers than we probably think of, right? So, but I don't have any proof. I should say
Yeah.
that's my own opinion. That is not a. I want to be very clear about what I just said there. But there are a few friends that have said, "Oh, my doctor says I shouldn't take it." I should probably re-engage some of those people, and now that it's been approved. But I
That
can think
that
of
that,
two or
that
three
blow,
people that said,
yeah.
"Oh, my doctor says I don't need it." It's like, oh, what the?
That blows my mind.
Yeah,
Anyway, the other part of it, the other side of this is it does make it easier for employers to actually, if they want a vaccinated workforce, it does make it easier for them to
yeah.
mandate
I don't. Of
vaccination
course,
of their
this is
workforce.
outside of a hospital where they mandated it, that made sense, or the government kind of mandated it. You want to work for the government, you got to listen to them, right? But Walmart, Google, Tyson, United Airlines, McDonald's, all going to make it mandated, and that's I don't. It's hard to. Again, I don't like the concept of mandating things. I just wish it was more of a. I wish there was just a better word, but it is a
No, no.
mandate, and I don't. I'm just not against it. I'm not a For me, I've
Well,
always felt to be kind of rebellious. I've been
yeah.
accused of being a rebellious person, and to sit here and say, "Oh, we should mandate things," is kind of counter to my very fiber. But this is just a no-brainer.
Yeah,
It's
and
really silly.
I honestly, my take on this is we gave people the choice to make the ability to make the right choice um, with the vaccine available, and a lot of people chose not to make that right choice, and that's why we're extending
Well,
this pandemic beyond where it needed to be, which is why we have these more virulent variants, etc.
so
And I
there is
think
a
the time
workaround,
is
right?
there. Yeah,
There
sorry,
is a
go on.
workaround. Instead of making it mandatory, just say, "Oh, in order to work at this, when you go to apply for a position, it's just, hey, you got to lift 50 pounds, you got to be able to walk up a flight of stairs, and oh, by the way, you got to be vaccinated," right? That type
Yeah,
of.
and
That's what one of the this economist has talked about
yeah, so yeah,
at Indeed hiring, right?
and Elizabeth Conkle basically said, yeah, that she did an analysis and she's saying it's a small percentage of job ads right now that are saying you need to be vaccinated for this position, but she says it's just going to
Yeah,
increase.
there it is.
It's going
Good.
to be there.
Hey, it doesn't have to be mandated, but it's just like, oh, you want to come work for our company? You got to
Sure.
get
Yeah.
vaccinated.
Yeah.
If you're
Yeah.
already working there and you're unvaccinated, that's on you. But you want to come through new and get a new badge and a picture and all that, you got to get a vaccine. So,
Yep.
John, the real big underlying thing here, I'm gonna move on to the next
Sure.
topic here. And
Absolutely. Please do.
that's the under 16. I guess we're
12-year
really
old.
the
Oh yeah,
12
under
the 12 to
16.
16
Oh yeah, actually, one thing we should clarify. Yeah, the approval right now,
is
the vaccine is authorized for 12-year-olds up. The approval was for 16-year-olds and up, and that reflects the time frame of the authorization. So the original authorization was for 16-year-olds and up. Then they rolled out
mhm.
12-year-olds to 16-year-olds, which is why there was that delay in availability for 12 to 16-year-olds. So they can still get a vaccine, but it's only authorized for that age group. It's not
Mm.
been fully approved. So that is a difference. But I'm sure and that again says to the more patient approach. It's not just a case of, well, we approve for this group, we approve for everyone. It's taking that logical sequential approach to making sure that the FDA is making sure they make the right decision on this vaccine.
So it has been authorized in July for under 12, right?
No,
And
it's not. No,
it's not emergency authorization in children under
it's
12.
just 12 to 16 is
Oh,
authorized.
it's more.
Um,
I see. I misread that. So
so
they started
so
the trial by midwinter. They may have it
Yes,
emergency
yes, that's
authorized.
the hope
Yep.
that yeah, children under 12 could be authorized midwinter of 2022. So
So
because
2022, you say. So next
yes,
winter. Mm.
yes, yes,
It says at this stage, if they're under 12, the FDA does not recommend it.
sure,
I
yeah.
think that's a good hold with that. Yeah, that's the
Yeah,
message. Do
it's
not.
again, it's recognizing that children don't necessarily react the same as adults to medication, which is why we do a lot of pediatric trials on other drugs. I mean,
But
it's an
there's
important difference, but
there's the
not
collateral damage, John. There's
well,
the
exactly.
collateral. Sorry, go ahead.
Which is why it comes back to it's incredibly important that as an adult, if you have the ability to get vaccinated, you get
Yeah.
vaccinated because you are by doing that you're conferring protection to your children because the Delta. I mean, this is one of the myths that has been built up around COVID, and not the myth. That's not the right word, but certainly the early variants seem to more affect the older population. The Delta variant seems to be much
Mm,
more equal in its
yeah.
approach as to who it affects, and it is hitting children. So if you've got children, get vaccinated, so at least you've got some degree of protection around them. And then obviously, as this gets authorized, then get your children vaccinated. But that's the only way you can protect them right now is is getting yourself vaccinated and do what you can for them longer term.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's, we're not going to be extremists and say stuff like, "Oh, if you're not vaccinated, you're killing children."
No, absolutely not.
We're not saying that. What we're saying is, certainly, now that it's approved, it just makes good sense, and you should be a good Samaritan. You should be a good American and go get vaccinated. Just be a good person, because
Absolutely.
there is that element. I hope people do understand that you are jeopardizing children if you're not vaccinated. It's just, I don't know. It's hard to envision how and why you would be so resistant to this, but and again, but I guess it depends. If I had reactions to other vaccines, or primary immune deficiency, I'm excluding those people, right? I'm talking
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
people who
Yep.
have. There's a good portion of people who are unvaccinated who got a flu vaccine or got a hepatitis. It's just hard to. Let's move on, right?
Yes.
Let's move on because we're running short of time. We've got some questions, but let's talk
Yeah.
about the other vaccines. Just
I'm
round it
just
out, right?
actually
Yeah.
so really I haven't really touched on many of the other vaccines. I think J&J have presented data on a booster shot for their vaccine. But I think the headline was, but analysts are unconvinced. I didn't read the article, so I don't know any more
Mm,
about it than that. The other one that I mean, in terms of
yeah.
mRNA, we've always talked Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna. Moderna has actually completed its submission to the US to the FDA for full approval of its vaccine for people aged 18 and older. So I mean, they've already been submitting data. Obviously, it's authorized. So the thought is that the Moderna one will probably move to approval fairly very quickly as well.
Yeah.
Again, we haven't seen any data that suggests there's any safety issues with the Moderna vaccine. I think it gets flagged at the same time as Pfizer in terms of the pericarditis, myocarditis. So I'm sure there'll be similar labeling, similar additional studies, but I would suspect that one will be through soon. I did notice actually, I saw again, saw a headline in passing today. The AstraZeneca vaccine isn't approved here, isn't even authorized in the US because I think because we had the J&J, we had the Moderna, we had the Pfizer BioNTech, there wasn't felt to be the need to have an additional vaccine here, particularly as it was being applied, elsewhere around the globe. I think there was talk of moving to approve the AstraZeneca vaccine um, to allow people to travel from the UK. And again, this is just a headline I saw in passing, so I don't know the background to it, if it's actually because it's not authorised or approved, it's been preventing people coming in. I'll do a bit more digging on that. So well, it'll be interesting to see what that does to the AstraZeneca vaccine with the FDA. But that's where the other vaccines stand at the moment.
Yeah. John, I think we lose sight of some of those other vaccines, but I think the key to really globally combating it. We want
Yep,
all of them to get approved. Absolutely. And,
absolutely.
and I, and I still think there's been some setbacks there, but that was to be expected. Those vaccines, I'm sure will. Um, I feel like J&J's Moderna, we know will get approved probably
Yep,
next month,
yep,
next 30
yep,
days.
yep.
J&J shouldn't be too far behind it. And then to be determined on the AstraZeneca one. And then, of course, we've got the Chinese have a couple, the Russians have one, but maybe we'll recap that another time.
Yeah, I found it's interesting because obviously the Chinese had the Sinopharm and the Sinovac, but they're also looking at developing their own mRNA vaccine.
Yeah.
Again, like similar to Taiwan, where it's difficulty accessing the global supply. So if we can't get to the global supply, let's develop our own. You got the Novavax has been delayed for various reasons. I'm sure that will come through. We then had CureVac, their
Yeah, that
first. candidate didn't show efficacy, but they've got backups. And then the other one that didn't show efficacy early on was Sanofi GSK, but they're moving forward as well. So we'll hear more about these other vaccines with time. It's just
Yeah.
the Pfizer one is the one in the news, and that's the one we want to celebrate right now.
Yeah,
But
but
honestly,
they're
as
Moderna
soon as
yeah.
as soon as Moderna gets approved, I'll be cracking open the champagne for that too.
Yeah.
And if
Yeah,
J&J
no,
gets approved, I'll crack open the champagne for that, because this is all good for the long-term health of humanity.
completely agree. I mean, this has been so much fun to discuss, John. I mean, I hope our audience feels some of our. We could sit here all day and talk about this, but we are kind of winding down the show here. It is historic. I hope everybody understands the sort of passion that John and I have and the excitement. I know it's hard when you're both scientists and kind of not normally the most passionate people in the world. We're not always cheerleaders, I guess, is what I'll say. But I like the idea of popping some champagne, John. Just as a quick, because we're going to move on to questions from our audience.
Sure.
We got
Yep.
quite a few. I
Yep.
do want to make a side note that both of our producers have children, not only under the age of 2.
Sure. Yep.
One of
Yep.
them has a 13-year-old and a 9-year-old, and that is really, I think that both of our producers are kind of really interested in what we're saying, John, because they are looking at this situation, and both of them are wondering, how do we handle this? And I know you and I are fortunate that we don't, but in talking to some other, not just our producers, but others, they're still reluctant to go on vacation. They're still reluctant to. There are significant others who sacrifice even going out because they don't want to. They're somewhat worried about their child or children, and that's if your child has any sort of. Just
Mhm.
think about if they're
Yep.
healthy. That's one thing. If they're susceptible, man, that's got to be scary as a parent. But you
Sure.
really do have to wonder about what you're doing and where you're going. So anyhow, let's jump right into some questions, John. I think we got some good ones. We got some tough ones. I don't know if you want to read the first one or you want me to,
Sure.
but
Let's go with the first one. Corey asks, "It is my understanding that stage 3 clinical trials take 2+ years for reasons of long-term effects, etc. If this is the case, how did the FDA reach a full approval status on this drug when the virus itself is only barely 2 years old?" Hopefully, we covered that
Mhm.
in during this discussion. There's a lot of, I mean, typical stage 3 trials, it hasn't got the same time pressure to try and get something through there. But the fact is that we had a population of subjects we could tap in to get them recruited very quickly. So then, I mean, usually a phase 3 trial, it isn't just the carrying out the trial, it's actually recruiting people can take a
Mhm.
long time. So recruiting that, your big chunk, your 2+ years could just be recruitment before you then actually, before you then do before you have sufficient patients on the trial to really carry it out.
But
So I think that the fact that we had a population we tap into made a lot of difference here.
yeah, and I think that the long-term piece is, yeah, efficacy, but that's been demonstrated, I believe.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
really the
absolutely.
stability of the vaccine is what was holding this up. It's a
Sure.
different long-term thing, Corey. I think you should. We appreciate your question, and you're right. But I hope we addressed it with there was a. It was very easy to accrue the patients they needed, so that accelerated things. And then on really the when you think of long term, it's not just efficacy. It's really the longer part of approval sometimes is the manufacturing stability, and they again because they
Sure.
did it in
Yes.
parallel, they hit it right. That's how
Yes.
they accelerated it. That was the real.
I,
That's what held it up. I think that's what's holding up Moderna right now. It's the stability of the drug that I don't know if they're waiving things necessarily, but there are ways to accelerate it to kind of do some certain things that give you comfort that, oh, if it's at its normal temperature, if I put it at a higher temperature and it's still effective for at a month at that temperature, well, that translates into longer stability. So that I think is more what holds up vaccines maybe than just efficacy, right?
and actually, that's a key point. Part of the FDA assessment during phase 3 is to look at your manufacturing facilities to make sure that they all meet standards, etc. And that was all it was all done as part of this. The FDA, the assessment of phase 3 data isn't just looking at the patient data and making sure all that is safe and efficacious, but there are these other supporting pieces, like I say, like manufacturing, to be sure that if we approve the facilities that are that's all been assessed. I mean, because what we're doing when the FDA inspects us is like, it's have we got the infrastructure to do what we say that we're qualified to do? That's really a big part of this too.
Yeah, no, it is. I hope we've addressed that one. We can move on. There's two that are very similar.
Yep.
Martin asks, is the drug approved by the FDA the exact same that has been used already, or will there now be a new drug manufactured per this approval? And then Jennifer asks, is this full FDA approval for a new vaccine that is not yet available? Or is it the same vaccine currently being distributed for emergency use? Oh, these are great questions. So again, John, I'm just going to give my
Yeah,
understanding
go
of it.
ahead.
It's the same. It's the same. This is the same
Yep.
vaccine, but as they manufacture new lots of it, that's when we do bridging studies, right? So I think maybe not a bridging study. They have to do when they make a new lot of this. They just have to go through all the same testing to make sure it's equivalent to the previous one.
Sure.
So the
Yeah.
short answer is um, what you've been using for emergency use is the same as what will be
Yes.
distributed going forward.
Uh,
That's the answer.
And so yeah, more really typically you wouldn't have that emergency use, but this was something that we needed to be out and in people's arms as soon as possible. So as soon as the data showed that the vaccine was effective, then it was authorized for emergency use.
Yeah.
And it's there in that word emergency use, words emergency use. The approval really is we've then taken time to look at the data, the supporting pieces to that, and we've said based on everything we're seeing, this drug is now approved for you. It's just
Yeah.
part of a
It's
sequence.
yeah. So 2 days ago when it was made, it'll be made the same as it is going forward, right?
Hmm.
That's what we're trying to say. It's not.
Exactly. Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
there isn't like some magic switch or whatever. It's all made the same way. So let's John, you want to maybe just
Yeah. Sure. So
talk about? We
I'll.
got one more, a couple more actually, a few more.
Should we go? Yeah. So Talia asks, is it true that the clinical trials and phase 3 and 4 testings will continue on this drug until 2023? If so, can the FDA's approval be changed as a result of those ongoing trials? So,
Mm,
as we actually, that's a really good question.
mm.
As that's true of any medication. Well, actually, it's not true. Let me step back. Yes, as we mentioned in the discussion, this drug. There are going to be more ongoing trials because there's a concern about the side effects that have been
Mhm.
observed with the myocarditis and pericarditis. So it's really trying to drill down: is that a significant occurrence, and how often does that occur, and does that merit some additional labeling to the vaccine?
Yeah.
If and with any drug, if there's subsequent trials, if something emerges during those trials that points to other safety issues, then it could result in withdrawal of that drug. It's not just about the vaccine. I mean, if there was something in those trials that merited a big safety signal, it might sort of what it might do. It might not necessarily take the vaccine off the market, but it might limit the population that it can be administered to. I'm not saying that's going to happen, but that's how that could possibly change. It's those trials may flag up like another susceptible population to side effects. If that's the case, then you sort of exclude them from further downstream
Yeah.
use. So
Yeah,
that's
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 it. So
that's all. That's typical unusual drug development, and I mean, and you read of other drugs over the last however many decades that have been on the market and then withdrawn. I mean, a big case in, but I mean, look at thalidomide. I know it's like
mhm.
an ancient example, but thalidomide was approved in Europe. Um, for use, and it was being administered for particularly help with morning sickness and insomnia and expectant mothers, etc. And then babies were being born in the late 50s, early 60s with deformities in terms of loss of arms, loss of legs, and various other things, shortened arms, etc. And then it was traced back to thalidomide, which was very quickly withdrawn from the market. So
Yeah,
that
the John, the couple things. One, the answer is yes. It'll be continued to be monitored. Goes out to like 2027 is when they'll look at it.
sure, yeah,
And then it
yeah,
is, they could potentially, if they find that indeed, a certain population susceptible to myocarditis or pericarditis, then they'll have to put some warning labels on there. But otherwise, this is, unless they see something really um, it's hard to imagine what it might be, but
Sure.
this is
Yeah.
basically approved. You mentioned that the drug from before, but the Biogen drug is in this bucket where it might get pulled, right? So we're not going to talk about that today, but it
Sure.
is
Yeah.
there's a that the bio is it I forget the name of, is it Adumumab? Is that the Biogen drug?
Aduhelm was
Yeah, thank you. So that drug, stay tuned. So that one may actually have a different outcome over time. So that was a good question. We got two more. Julie asked, "Does the Pfizer vaccine alter your DNA in any way?" So I'm going to answer this by saying altering DNA is kind of a kind of it happens all the time in you. So I think when you on the surface, if I say yes to this, it's going to worry people, right? But like the reality is, anytime you get a protein-based vaccine, your DNA turns out a new protein, so it's really affecting your DNA. So in this case, even though it's a message coming in, it's just turning on genes. It is not like, it does get incorporated, but not like, let's be clear, this is not like you've got foreign pieces of DNA and you're going to turn into Spider-Man or something. Like, no, like, cut that out. This is advancements in science that are no different than any other vaccine. So if you thought that hepatitis, whatever shots you've gotten, those are altering your DNA, right? That you can't get a de novo protein produced without having some DNA. They come from DNA. So, I mean, is it permanent and all this stuff? I mean, no. And if it is, it's at a very, very small amount. I wouldn't worry or bat an eyelash about my DNA in this instance, John. And you can add how you feel we want to add, but the answer is it does. But so do almost every. I would think any vaccine does. And then in terms of altering DNA, every cellular and gene therapy that's out there, and there are hundreds of them, those patients are getting it, and they're not. There's no long term effect. I mean, at least to the best of our knowledge, John. So maybe you can chime in, but that's how
I,
I'm going to answer that one.
I think you probably said it best. They're not doing anything in a sinister way. They're doing if they're changing it, it's to help
Yeah, you're not
mechanisms
going to
in the
grow
body.
I don't know what people,
Yeah.
but when I will say, Julie, you're safe. Take the vaccine. Even your DNA is going to be 99.999999999 the same. It's
Yeah.
not altering your DNA. It's just, I
Yeah.
mean, it would be so hard to even do a test pre and post on someone's DNA and expect to see a difference. You wouldn't. Absolutely not. I mean, I don't think you would. All right, one last question, John. You go ahead. You give us this one.
So yeah, I think the name's I'm sorry if I mispronounced this. I think the name's Bo asks, does the FDA approval address how long it will be before another shot is needed? Meaning, do we know yet whether this will need to be an annual shot? Right now, we don't,
Mhm.
and right now, Pfizer and Moderna are both presenting data that they are saying indicates that a booster shot will be needed. That's all under assessment. This is the sort of thing that, again, longer term monitoring of people and longer term trials will tell us if we need to go to a multiple shot.
Yeah, I'll answer it.
Or if we go for annual updates or things like that, and I'll also pass it to Dom.
Yeah, no, you nailed it, John. You're right in that we don't know, but whether it's a booster shot and maybe it's another boost and then you're done, that all depends somewhat on what the virus does, how much immunity there is out there, how we are, if the rest of the world gets vaccinated, all of those things are going to impact. But I mean, if I were betting on it, I'd probably guess we're going to see boosts, and then you know it's 50-50 that you'll get an annual shot. It's still too early to determine, because there is still hope that maybe you get a boost and then we get it under control and the variants aren't the variants aren't as virulent as the Delta virus, and maybe we're okay. So
Sure.
it's
Yeah.
still to be determined, but I
And
think either way you're going to have to look at another. I'm probably 100%, 99% sure you'll get a boost or an annual shot, one or the other.
yeah.
But that 5 years from now, you might not need to be getting it every year, although that's
I
a
think
possibility too.
Yeah, and I think that plays back into, you mentioned tetanus earlier. I mean, I remember the
Mhm.
window between tetanus shots was shorter, but now as they've obviously monitored more longer and longer. The window is now opened up whereby if you had a tetanus shot, I think you said 10 years ago, that might be the right window. If
Yeah.
you've had a shot within 10 years, you're okay, because obviously they're seeing that it's people still have, the ability to deal with tetanus at longer and longer time windows. So that will be part of the, it's still early days. We'll learn more about this vaccine longer term.
Yeah, it's exciting to think about it, and I just feel like we're gonna get something, either a boost or two, or it'll be an annual thing. But
Sure.
I don't think
Yeah.
any of us are done, and that's a good thing. I feel like we're well. I certainly feel safer if I'm getting a boost or another shot. So, John, I think that's it. It was really
I think we're
great to
done.
have all those questions. Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely.
John, what about some weekend plans?
Oh God, I haven't even thought about the weekend. So like I mentioned earlier, the whole Jamaica extravaganza is sadly called off. So,
Mm,
it's now going into wedding planning mode for. So my son and fiance were already going to have a civic ceremony in Boston in mid-September. So it's now trying to make that more of an occasion, because that was just going to be a very simple, just both
gotcha.
sets of parents there. And so my wife is going into full on overdrive, figuring out what we need to do for that. So
Yeah,
that I think that will dominate the conversation
sure,
for
sure.
at least until September 16th, which is when their big day will now
Yeah,
be.
and
Um,
you want it to be so special, and
exactly.
you're this the things that for somebody who's I don't have children under 12, no one's getting married, but all the things in the impact on COVID is so far reaching, and this is just another example of
Sure.
like such a important part is just going to have to be you're gonna I don't want to say settle, but I hope it's still the dream wedding, but it is something that I'm sure you guys are
Oh,
exhausted having to change and think about, and I totally get that.
yeah, we'll,
That
we'll, we'll
sucks.
we'll definitely make it as as I think it's one of those things. A wedding is always a special day, and
Yeah,
we'll make it as extra special as we
yeah,
can. I mean, the COVID prevented us going to my nephew's wedding in London last year, which I'd love to have done, and again that was at a time where you couldn't have more than 15 people at a wedding.
yeah.
But
I think
you adapt, don't you? I mean, that's one of the joys of being human. We
yeah.
adapt to
I
things.
bet I bet if when we clean up, I say clean up when it becomes like safer than it currently is, or what we think of as quote unquote safe. We're going to have an explosion in like travel and family reunions. I mean, you can just feel it. It'll be
Sure. Yeah.
the travel and entertainment industry are going to be overwhelmed because everybody's we kind of got some vacations, but you can feel it kind of locking back down. Uh, John, I am still kind of putting my house together, so I'll spend most of the weekend moving. But I've been using my precision cooker, my sous vide. That's been a lot of fun. I don't know if anybody knows what that is, but it's like a water-based system to cook with,
Yep.
and
Yep.
it
I want.
makes it is so good, John. I mean, it is bulletproof in terms of how tender stuff is if you seal that bag up the right way and pop it in there. It
Sure.
is. I'm having so much fun there, but I got end of the year pool party to go to. Not that I'm going to get in the pool. So Saturday night I got some fun going on, but the rest of the weekend, John, since I last spoke to you, I painted my office. I put together furniture from IKEA. My for only until Tuesday did my back and knees stop hurting because I was doing manual labor for 2 days for me. But I'm looking right now, and I got a good. I'll spend most of Saturday rearranging, mercifully, and I still have a dining room that's got a hole in it. They're coming tomorrow to take care of that. I got all sorts of outside work that starts tomorrow as well, so I'll be managing some of that. But hope to have some fun times. Anyhow, John.
Yeah, I definitely want some details of your sous vide at some point.
Yeah,
That's
it's good
definitely
stuff,
intriguing.
especially
Have it
fish.
have
Fish
it
the key.
Yeah, yeah. Having eaten at lots of good restaurants around the globe where sous vide is definitely featured in
Yeah.
their food preparation. I'm keen to hear more
I
about it.
haven't. So I've used it 3 times. I have not seared anything after I've used it because my wife's like, I don't care what it looks like.
Okay, yeah, sure, yeah,
So
yeah,
because that's like kind of a finishing piece. But I'm
exactly.
excited to
Yes,
do it,
yes.
and the whole, even my son is like intrigued by it. It takes a lot to get a 15-year-old's attention, and even he was like, what is this thing doing? But it cooks
Sure.
it. It just cooks it, so unbelievably tender and through, right? The whole thing
Yep.
is
Yep.
cooked the same
Absolutely.
way.
Yep.
So, but don't forget my uni pizza oven. I want to try to use that. That's a wood pellet oven and everything, and I got the right pan for. I got the right paddle now, the right size paddle. I have all that came in last week. Ordered one online. I don't know if you remember. I had too big a paddle. I couldn't get the pizza in, so
Sure.
I got a
Yeah.
smaller size paddle and got a gun to keep the temperature right. And I think if time permits, just depends on how much work I get done. So, John, you have a great rest of your week. This was
Absolutely,
an
you
awesome
too.
podcast, man. It's great.
Enjoy your golfing event as well.
Oh yeah, thanks.
We'll talk later.